Minnesota Department of Transportation and the chair for the Environmental Quality Board. And this being an ARIS meeting, Commissioner Stroman has been our ARIS chair, but she is not able to be with us today. So I am stepping in as chair for the ARIS meeting too. So with that, just a couple announcements from me. Sorry. I want to mention that although he's not an ARIS member, public member Ken Foster is on the meeting today. Thank you for joining us, Ken. And he has sadly submitted his resignation from the board effective tomorrow. So I just want to take this moment to, first of all, thank you, Board Member Foster, for all your service to the board over the years and all your contributions to the work of the board. We very much appreciate it. And I hate to put you on the spot, but since you joined us, I wonder if you wouldn't mind saying a few words about your experience and where you're going from here.
Oh, thank you so much. Yeah, I did give everyone a heads up a couple of months ago, so I didn't just submit it yesterday. But we wanted to wait until my last meeting. So yeah, I've really loved the experience being on the board. I've seen, what a first-rate entity this is, and it's, I've been in Minnesota, I have 17 years now, and it's further confirmed, what a great job Minnesotans do in government and with government and in the environmental arena as well. So really it's been a privilege to be part of all these discussions and see all the good work that's being done. And my leaving is just because I've taken another position, a different job in New York State. So I'll be moving to New York State at the end of this semester here. And so thanks everyone. And I'm really thankful for the opportunity I've had here.
Thank you for that, Ken, and best wishes to you as you move to New York State, and hope all goes well out there for you. And again, thank you for your work on the board and your contributions. So very much appreciate that. So now I think we can go ahead and move on to a roll call. Yes. I'll ask Executive Director Catherine Schler to go ahead and do the roll call.
Thank you, Chair. I think we are expecting 7 folks, and I think we are there. I will call the roll. Commissioner Arnold.
I'm here. Sorry, I couldn't get off mute fast enough.
That is okay. Board Member Bauerkemper.
Here, thanks. Hi.
Commissioner Daubenberger.
Present.
All right. Board Member Hintz.
Here.
Chair Holman. I believe Chair Holman will be joining us a little late. Commissioner Kessler. I am here. Board Member Nelson.
Present.
And Commissioner Stroman is not with us today. So that is 6 members of our ARIS subcommittee. That is a quorum for the subcommittee business. At this time, if there are other board members on who want to, I think we've seen some of them, but if there are other board members who want to announce that they're here, this would be your time. I think I see Commissioner Gronvall.
Hello, I'm here at least until my next legislative meeting in about an hour.
And Board Member Bakken is on the phone.
Yes.
And Board Member Katzenberger is here with us in the room. Did I miss any EQB members that are with us, even if they are not ARIS members? All right, well, thank you all for being here. We are at a quorum, so we can proceed.
Right. So then we can move on to the agenda, and the next item is approving the consent agenda. So the consent agenda is the meeting minutes from the July 19th, 2023 meeting, and that is in your board packet, page 5. I'm sorry, the July ARIS meeting, to be clear. And the preliminary agenda for today's meeting, March 20th of 2024, ARIS meeting today. That agenda is on page 3 of your packets. So could I get a motion to approve of the consent agenda?
I will make that.
Commissioner Kessler, moved to approve. Is there a second?
I read it in.
Perfect. I get a second on that consent agenda.
I'll second it.
Thank you, Board Member Hicks. I think that's right. Okay. All right, any discussion on the motion? Hearing none. All in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed? Nay? All right, hearing no opposition, the motion carries and the consent agenda is adopted. Thank you all. And so with that, I will turn it over to Executive Director Fischler for her key report.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you to everybody who's here today. There's some energy in the room, which is nice to see so many of you. And I'm looking forward to the discussion today. So logistics, just a reminder, as it will tell you on your screen, this meeting is being recorded. And we do have a meeting chat that is open and visible. However, the chat's not going to be kept as part of the meeting records, and so it should only be used for logistical issues if you're having trouble hearing us or something like that. ARIS members, the small group of you, we welcome your questions and feedback to the presenters today. Feel free to use the raise hand function or jump in during discussions. You should be able to mute and unmute yourself. Other board members, there will be times where we will give you the opportunity to participate in the discussion as well, and you all should also be able to control your own mute and camera buttons. If you are virtual, it does help us follow the conversation if you can put on your camera when you're speaking. For members of the public, there is going to be an opportunity for public input during item 5, the feedlot EAW form, and then at the end of the agenda as well for any additional items. If you're here in person, we have sign-up sheets for you to indicate that you'd like to make a comment. If you're online, when we get to one of the public comment parts of the agenda, please go ahead and use that raise hand feature to indicate that you'd like to make a comment, and we will add your name to the list. And we will queue commenters and likely go back and forth between any commenters in the room and any that are online. If you are online, we will notify you when you can unmute yourself and then speak. Please just give it a second. There's sometimes a bit of a lag in that part. Also, the how to comment and how to raise your hand is shown on the screen. It's also in the packet. So moving on to reports and announcements, a couple of things. The Department of Administration has recently issued an RFP in the process of renewing the master contract for environmental review and technical services. So the contract was something that was created in 2020 to make it easier and to streamline the administrative process of procuring sort of consultant services to do environmental review and related technical work. So it provides access to consultants for assistance regarding really all aspects of planning, documentation, and production of environmental review documents and similar items that is available then to state responsible government units and local governmental units as well. So it's now being renewed. Generally, these contracts go for a 5-year period. And so the request for proposals closes on April 16th, and any interested consultants or applicants should review and apply by that date. And then any of those of you that may use the master contract, you'll be wanting to look for when the new version of the contract is available, which I believe will be later this fall. Given the news that board member Foster is resigning, we are going to be putting up the posting for a board member from Congressional District 7. It should be posted to the Secretary of State's open appointments page shortly, and we'll be spreading the word. So if you know anybody from the 7th Congressional District who would be a good member of the board, please share that information with them. We will miss Ken greatly, but hopefully can get someone else awesome into that seat. Finally, legislative items. It's been a busy week or two in the legislature, and the EQB staff are closely tracking 3 bills that might potentially require the board to make revisions to the environmental review rules in 4410. These include a bill that would require us to add a mandatory category for animal feedlots with a threshold of 10,000 animal units. I know that bill is up in a committee at 3 p.m., so we'll see if we're done talking about feedlots by then. There's also some changes being called the Minnesota Energy Infrastructure Permitting Act, which clarifies and changes the ways in which the PUC permits issue site and route permits, including environmental review. There's two different versions of that bill. One would direct us to make some changes also to 4410, primarily to correct cross references. And then last, there's a bill that has been introduced that would change some of the petition requirements and some requirements around scoping with EISs. So we're continuing to watch all of these as session moves forward. If any of them pass, then we will be probably likely to need to do rulemaking and need to come to the board to authorize rulemaking in the future. So stay tuned, though we never really know until the last day of session which of those things are going to pass. And that is my report, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Commissioner. Great. Does anybody have any questions on the executive director's report? Raise your hand or jump in for those online. I'm not seeing any, so thank you for that, Executive Director Nuschler. So then the next item on the agenda is the election of the chair for our ARIS group here. And as I mentioned earlier, Commissioner Stroman has been serving as the chair, and she has indicated that she would be willing to continue on in that role. And I have not heard of others who are interested, but with that, I am wondering if anyone would like to nominate Commissioner Stroman for the position.
Chair Daubenberger, I am happy to nominate Commissioner Stroman. I'm grateful that she wants to continue in that role.
Thank you for that. Commissioner Kessler, I have a motion to nominate Commissioner Stroman for the chair role. So with that, then I will see if there are any other nominations. Not hearing any other nominations, and I'll add too, I am very appreciative that Commissioner Stroman is willing to continue to serve in the chair role. So with that, I think then we can go ahead and vote on the nomination or vote to approve of Commissioner Stroman as chair for ARIS. So is there a motion to approve Commissioner Stroman as chair for this ARIS group?
Well, I can make that motion again.
Thank you.
Variety.
Perfect. So motion to approve of Commissioner Stroman to continue in the ARIS chair role by Commissioner Kessler. Could I have a second on that?
This is Commissioner Arnold. I'll second that.
Thank you, Commissioner Arnold. Any discussion? Everybody's good with Commissioner Stroman serving as chair. So with that, we need to call the roll on this vote. Yeah.
Commissioner Arnold.
Aye.
Board Member Bauerkemper.
Yes.
Commissioner Daubenberger.
Yes.
Board Member Hintz.
Yes.
Has Chair Holman joined us? Commissioner Kessler.
Yes.
Board Member Nelson.
Yes.
Commissioner Stroman. Chair Holman. That is, six ayes, Madam Chair, and 2 not present.
All right. So the nomination and the motion passes. So Commissioner Stroman is going to continue as our chair for ARIS. Thank you all for that. Again, thanks to Commissioner Stroman for her willingness to continue in the role. So the next on the agenda, we have Kayla Walsh, Environmental Review Program Administrator, UB, and Megan Abely, the Environmental Review Project Manager for the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency, who will present information about the alternative forms for completing EAWs, and the work MPCA is doing to update the feedlot-specific EAW form. So ARIS members, this is the first time you're hearing in depth about this work today, and it's just informational today. We expect moving forward that the MPCA will come back to ARIS with a request to approve the updates to the EAW form, and then ARIS can make a recommendation on approval. And that recommendation would likely move then forward to the full board, and PCA is still working on the timeline for all of that, and they may come back in about June, or perhaps in the fall too. But for attendees who are interested in this item, we'll open up time for comments at the end of the presentation. So we'll take ARIS member comments first. We'll see if other EQB board members who are tuned in would also like to comment. But then we'll have a public comment period right at the end of this part of the agenda, as well as the general public comment period at the end. We will we'll also take written comments anytime after this meeting, following the procedures described in the packet, and they'll be shared at the ARIS meeting when we consider that version. So with that, go ahead, Kayla and Megan.
Thank you, Chair and board members, ARIS members, members of the public. Again, I'm Kayla Walsh, so I work on environmental review here at EQB, and I'll just be setting the stage for our discussion today, talking about feedlots and environmental review. And all the information that we'll be going through can also be found in your packets on board packet page 9, beginning with the memo, the feedlot memo. So all feedlot projects do have a threshold after which an EAW is mandatory. So we can go to the next slide. And this is the mandatory EAW category here. It's currently required if there's a construction or expansion of a feedlot with capacity of 1,000 animal units or more. And if that's in a sensitive area, that lowers to 500 animal units. And unique to this category is that connected actions do not apply, but phased actions do. And then in the large majority of cases, the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency would be the responsible governmental unit for a feedlot project doing the EAW form, but the county is also named in this rule as a potential to be the RGU. Next slide. So there is an existing alternative EAW form currently in use for feedlots, and so that means that it is an alternative to the standard form. And I'll provide a little bit of background on how alternative forms do work in the context of environmental review in our rules, but then Megan will provide a walkthrough of the EAW form and the updates that MPCA is proposing to that existing form. And that will include their engagement process, edits to the form, and the guidance that will accompany that. So first, we're starting off with a screenshot just to show what we're referring to today as our standardized EAW form or standard form. That meets our rule requirements and was the one last updated in December 2022 to add the climate questions. So that's the 13-page worksheet, 22 questions. Info provided on this form is really meant to help determine any potential environmental effects from a project. And the RGU has authority and responsibility to identify what information would be included on the EAW form, to assess the information, and then to determine if there is a need for an environmental impact statement or an EIS. So EQB's rules do allow for an alternative to this form to be used instead of the standard form if it is an approved alternative form. And this is what our rules say specifically about that approval. The EQB chair may approve the use of an alternative EAW form if an RGU demonstrates the alternative form will better accommodate the RGU's function or better address a particular type of project, and the alternative form will provide more complete, more accurate, and more relevant information. So how did we get to having a feedlot form? In May of 1999, the governor then vetoed a feedlot bill, but in that veto, he also specified and directed the EQB to develop an alternative EAW form for animal feedlots meant to expedite preparation time and minimize costs without reducing the quality of the information in the EAW. So the first EAW alternative form for feedlots was approved in 2000. And since then, we have not had any content changes in the form in the past 20+ years. So now MPCA is developing updates to that alternative EAW form for the feedlots to, again, better accommodate the RGU's function, to better address this particular type of project for a complete, accurate, and a relevant set of questions for feedlots. So the last thing I'll clarify before I hand it over to Megan is that MPCA is also developing the guidance on how to complete the form for feedlots, but that is provided in the packet for informational purposes, and EQB is not required to act on the guidance document, only the alternative form. And again, today is just for informational purposes. So with that, Megan, please walk us through.
All right, I'll wait till you get that slide up there. So my name is Megan Cabley. I'm a project manager in environmental review, the environmental review unit here at MPCA. And about a year ago, our unit began the process of updating or creating a revision to the feedlot EAW to make the process more efficient for both proposers and also reviewers. And a part of that is to bring the language in the feedlot EAW closer to the standard EAW. And mainly in this process, we just want to be transparent. We've worked with interagency as well as external agency groups, and just to try to gain feedback on this revision and the revision process. So in brief, I wanted to start with defining what a feedlot is, because there are many different definitions of that, but for our case, there's pretty specific numbers to talk about. I want to cover how this ties into environmental review, and then I'll also talk about what our motivations are to change the feedlot EAW, and what our draft looks like today, which is in your packet, and how we've included that feedback into the draft. So for starters, what is a feedlot? A feedlot is a farm where livestock are contained in lots or buildings, or any manure may accumulate. It could be 2 horses. However, in this case, we are talking specifically about regulated feedlots. So feedlots that have 10 or more animal units in shoreland or a sensitive area, and 50 animal units or more outside of shoreland are required to register with the MPCA. The PCA regulates the collection, transportation, storage, processing, and disposal of animal manure and other livestock operational wastes. The feedlot program also implements rules governing those activities, provides assistance to counties and the livestock industry. So today, we're talking about environmental review, but not the feedlot permitting program. They're 2 different programs. However, we do have George Schwint on the line to answer feedlot questions. He's really the guru of all things feedlot. So George is standing by to help me with any questions that we might have. So in the state of Minnesota, there are about 18,000 registered feedlots. But remember, this ranges from 10+ animal units to thousands of animal units. And that's what this map shows on the left, is all active and inactive registered feedlots in the state of Minnesota. The right photo shows the counties that are delegated to administer the PCA feedlot program. And you can see that correlates to where those feedlots are registered at. Counties can be delegated to be responsible for feedlot registration, permitting, inspections, and complaint follow-up. That is conducted through a cooperative agreement between the MPCA and the counties. About 50 out of 87 counties participate in that program. Before I get too far in, let's talk animal units because it's certainly something that is relevant to our conversation today. So animal units does not equal the number of animal head. And so that's something important to look at. So let's look at those numbers. So Minnesota uses animal units to qualify the size of livestock feedlots. One animal unit is equivalent to the amount of manure produced by 1,000 pound steer. And this is important because this determines whether or not environmental review is needed. In this case, the example under Animal Units 101, if we wanted to know how many mature dairy cows it took to equal 1,000 animal units, we take that times the factor you can see on the left of on the right of 1.4, or 1,000 times 1.4 equals 714 head of mature dairy cows to equal 1,000 animal units. That changes for each animal type. So for swine, it takes 3,333 head to equal 1,000 animal units. Or finally, for turkey, the big number, 55,555 head of turkey to equal 1,000 animal units. This is an important example to look at. For example, if I have 700 head of mature dairy cows, I do not need environmental review as long as it's outside of shoreline. But once I cross that threshold, then that mandatory category kicks in. So let's look at environmental review. How does this play into what we're talking about today? Our current mandatory category in feedlots, Caleb covered briefly, is an EAW is required when there's construction of an animal feedlot facility with a capacity of 1,000 animal units or more, or the expansion of an existing facility by 1,000 animal units. Or in another case, for the construction of an animal feedlot facility of more than 500 animal units or expansion when it's located in a sensitive location. And that sensitive location could be a shoreline, delineated floodplain, wild-attended river, karst area. And we are not talking about changing any animal unit thresholds here. We are just simply looking at the animal feedlot EAW. Kayla covered briefly why there is an alternative EAW for animal feedlots. And that is because as Kayla mentioned, in '99, the governor directed EPA to develop this alternative form. We are still using that same form in these advances. The intention of that was to expedite preparation time and minimize costs, and meant to simplify the process for owners and operators. You can just buzz through those bullet points. However, when we looked at the last 10 years of our review in the environmental assessment, in the environmental review unit, of the 52 processed EAWs, and you can advance, right? I wish I had a of the 52 that we looked at, they were all submitted by third-party consulting firms. These are not small operations. And so we know that for the last 10 years, we have been working with large operations who are submitting this via contracting firms. Okay, next slide. And a little bit into the weeds about our current process, but when we look at how our unit currently reviews an EAW, whether it's a feedlot EAW or a standard EAW for another mandatory category, we are looking at the same things. Whether or not it's on the form or not, we are looking at those 10 strong resource areas that may or may not be able to see on that table of contents, but it includes land use, soils, geology, water resources, hazmat, air, water, greenhouse gas emissions. So we are considering all the same thing currently in the feedlot EAW, regardless of whether or not it's on the form. But due to that difference, there's considerable back and forth that we have with the proposer because our form is outdated. We can cover that in a pre-application meeting, but that doesn't always happen. And as well, because this form it's different than our standard EAW, not all of our staff is familiar with being handed a feedlot EAW. And that does affect our efficiency of review if we only have certain staff members that feel comfortable reviewing a feedlot EAW. We use the same type of mapping tools with the feedlot EAW as we do with the standard. In the case of feedlot EAW, as a side note, we have a great greenhouse gas calculator for feedlots that we have been able to utilize, and this has been very helpful. Okay, next slide. So some of the motivations for a change that I've already covered, but I wanted to clarify is we want to update the form to match what's in the standard form. And one of those major things is the 2022 climate update that was made for the standard EAW. That's if this will be used in the feedlot EAW, that's a major section. We're adding sections of content that is currently in our standard EAW to our feedlot EAW. Part of that, we also want to bring the language closer of the standard to the feedlot, and just it will improve the proposer and reviewer efficiency, less back and forth. And then we can consistently address all of those resource items that I mentioned earlier. We can walk through that table of contents and say, yes, this is what we're reviewing. As you can imagine, over 24 years, there are also updates that we'd like to make as in review or the feedlot program, their staff edits. In the packet, when you were looking at the draft feedlot form, there are all kinds of colors, but what I wanted to bring forward was an idea of what we were adding and why. So as you're looking at that feedlot revision packet, the draft EAW contains different font colors. The black font would be the original feedlot EAW language. The blue font is bringing in that standard EAW language to better match the EAW. Green font is the climate language that we would be adding that's currently in the 2022 standard EAW. And finally, the red is like our updates or our clarifications or our edits that we would like to add. And I would note that a majority of those red updates are in the manure management section, which was very closely crafted with our feedlot program staff. We also have that guidance document that's included in the packet, and that will also be updated as we work on updating this draft before we bring it back to present to Paris. So currently our feedlot program, the PCA feedlot program is updating their permit process and is going to be posting this process. And I mentioned that because as we work through where we're at today, we began working with the feedlot program back February of 2023. Oh, it's here on my slide, 2023. And from there, we crafted language that we brought forward to the DNR, to EQB, Department of Ag, tribes. We held many meetings where I presented this draft just to get as much feedback as we can. We posted this draft that you have on Smart Comment in January for 30 days. We had some excellent feedback from the public, from producers, from tribes. And so where we sit today is looking at a draft, but also knowing that the feedlot program is now between February and of last year and now, they're in the process of updating their permitting process. And if those proposed changes go through, we will need to look at the manure management section of the draft that's before you today. And so what we want to do is wait until that process is close to complete, which is July of August this year, and work with them again to make sure that that language is right, better aligned, the best aligned with that feedlot permitting program, and then bring it back to ARIS for our recommendations. So that's it in a nutshell. Our goal is to be more efficient, more consistent, and have the content be much closer to what we do with a normal, rather a standard environmental assessment. So with that, I'd be happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Megan and Kayla. Yeah, so ARIS members, any questions? Comments? Go ahead, Commissioner Kessler.
Well, I'll just note, thanks for letting me go first. I have to leave in 10 minutes to go be in transit to go meet with legislators. So I want to say thank you to everyone who has been working on this for more than a year. And there's, as kind of noted in Megan's comments and Kayla's comments, a lot of these ideas are a long time coming. So it's not like they just came up with all of this new stuff in the last year. These are things that have come in an evolution out of conversations with those who are invested in the climate action framework, those who are invested in efficiency, transparency, and like clear process, those who are invested in relationships with tribes and tribal sovereignty, those who are invested in just efficiency in the way that the DNR and the PCA work together around things like water appropriation permits and NPDES permits. And I think it's a lot, and I had to look at the key a number of times to understand what green and blue and red meant. But I just want to raise up the fact that this is the work of many, and I think it is a long time coming, and appreciate that. And I also appreciate that, you know, this is iterative, and that in the vein of always trying to be better and learning, that this is the right thing to do right now. So thanks a lot.
Thank you for those comments. Other ARIS member comments or questions? Go ahead, Board Member Bauer-Kemper.
All right, thank you, Chair, and thanks to our presenters for walking us through this. I have 3 questions initially that are, with my apologies, are mainly to help me understand how to read the draft. The first one is, what is, I have some sense, even though, like Commissioner Kessler, I keep going back to the ink color guidelines. What is the yellow highlighting? How is that being used in the process here?
Those are distances or proximities to boundaries or schools or cemeteries or churches that we wanted to make sure that those numbers were quantified. So when we say nearby or in proximity of or 1.5 miles, so that's a number that's in progress that we need to make sure that if we're changing that from 1 to 1.5, where did that come from?
Okay.
For example,
So
tribal boundaries might change once we go back to the tribes and talk to them again about that number.
Okay, so the yellow means that it's something that's under active discussion.
Correct.
Okay, thanks. And then here again, I just need help navigating the document. So within what I would call section 10, subsection A, subsection 3, so 10A III, there's a reference there to, it says, note, if a project is within 10 miles of tribal lands, reach out to respective tribal nations in consideration of this section. So what is the section, like in consideration of this section? Does this section refer to 10A3 or does it refer to 10A or does it refer to the entirety of 10? How do we use the word section in this?
I don't know, and I don't have the pleasure of having that. Thank you so much.
Did just see in the chat a request that when we get to that page, could someone announce which page of the form
Sure.
or the packet we are looking at?
It is
Yeah, I think
11.
that's packet page 21 and form draft page 11. And that would be 10A I.
I think this is, that section, meaning when we're talking about zoning. When we're
So
talking about,
so it refers specifically to the subsection 3.
yes, yep,
Okay, all right. I think that makes sense, like document logistics, that's where the note is, but I just didn't know how
Yeah.
section is used. Okay, and then one more thing, kind of along those lines. So right below there, same page. So packet page 21, draft page 11, section 10B or subsection 10B refers to item 9A above. But I don't know about 9A. Where do we find 9A?
Are you still on that page 21?
Yeah, so page 21 has a reference to item 9A. And I don't know, like item section, I'm not sure how the term's being used, and I just want to know what item 9A is.
Yeah, certainly this could be a typo if the reference is in the wrong spot.
Yeah, that's a typo 9A.
Okay, okay, thank you.
So does it refer to like the entire item 9, like permits and approvals required? Or is
Yes.
it referring to something? Okay, all right, cool.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks. So
Cumulatively,
those,
everything under.
those are my questions. Again, I appreciate your patience helping me navigate the document. Thank you.
Yeah, it is a big document.
And I will just note for the folks, because hybrid is difficult, we have some other folks from MPCA's Environmental Review Group on, who are in the room providing a little extra phone a friend help. Because everything is a team effort, as Commissioner Kessler said. So apologies that we can't move the camera fast enough that you can see all of that.
Thanks for that clarification. And Board Member Bauer-Kemper, did you have any other questions or comments?
No, that was all. That's helpful. I really appreciate the help so I can read the thing a bit better. That was great. Thanks.
Thank you for that. All right, other ARIS members, questions or comments? Not hearing anything more from ARIS members, we'll go on to EQB board members who are joining us today. Any questions or comments?
Commissioner Doppenberger or Chair Doppenberger, Peter Bakken. I had a couple questions.
Go ahead, Board Member Bakken.
Thank you. There was a comment of the comfort level of reviewing the EAW and made me think of, are there any provisions made for those designated feedlot counties that have an established feedlot program? Is there any opportunity for input or review from those entities as a local source of understanding the site, maybe providing some clarification to MPCA? And then I was wondering if you could give some examples of what kind of parameters would be looked at from a climate perspective. Thank you.
Thank you.
So when we receive a draft EAW, and that's when the proposer submits that to the PCA, we immediately send out a notice to counties, county or counties that are involved. And that is meant to do an immediate, essentially scoping of interest that they may have or input they may have about the proposed project. So yes, we do ask for county input in right away initially. And then also again, during the public comment portion, once we have a completed draft that we send out for public review. We do that with tribes as well. We have a standing list of contacts that we make once we receive that draft EAW.
Deegan, can I ask a clarifying follow-up question? Because that answers one question. I'm not sure if that was his question.
Oh, okay.
I think another question, if this wasn't his question, is how have delegated counties been involved in collecting input to revise the EAW form, if at all?
That's a great question. We have not reached out to counties. However, I am presenting to MCPESA in July, so that could very well be done at that time. MCPESA is the Minnesota Planning and Zoning Administration. Thank you. It's a organization of planning and zoning, and we could reach out to feedlot folks then. The second part of the question was relating to greenhouse gas. Could you repeat that again?
Basically, my question is, and these rules and proposals basically direct me or affect me directly in my farming operation. So that's the basis of my question. And I appreciate the previous question of clarification. Basically, the biggest frustrations we had with EAW was from a time standpoint. It took, we basically had a shovel-ready project that we were waiting on the EAW. So with some more involvement of local designated counties, I think, as was stated in the question previously, involvement of the local would probably expedite some of this comfort level of reviewing the EAWs. So I thank you for that. The climate aspect, if Farmer Bakken is wanting to expand my feedlot and I'm in need of satisfying the portion of the EAW with regard to climate, what kinds of things would I have to do from a financial standpoint to satisfy the climate requirements that you're asking for in the EAW? Does that help clarify my question?
It does. So just as a side note, none of what we're asking for would be new. We currently ask for this information with projects. And there are two different sections in the EAW that addresses the new climate change language. The first is section 7. It looks at climate adaptation and resilience, and it's an opportunity to take the proposed project and bring out components of that project, maybe top 3 or top 4 components of what you plan on doing, and then bring that and analyze that against some of the changes that are projected with the climate. And in our analysis, we're bringing forward 5 climate trends and 2 projected trends. So warmer and wetter, more in storm intensity, kind of drawing a blank here, but we've got 7 different climate trends that we would be analyzing against each of those components. So it's really an exercise in saying this is what I'm doing. This is how climate change might affect my project site, my location, as well as this is how my project will be influenced by these changes into the future. And that just helps plan the design of the site, looking at not only the land use, but the design of what's going on as we look at changing climate. And that second part is Section 18, the greenhouse gas emissions. And that is really looking at numbers, that the animal type, what emissions we're talking about. Is it enteric fermentation? That this, like I said, this great greenhouse gas calculator that uses factors to essentially input something into this spreadsheet, and then output will be carbon dioxide equivalent, so that we can see what the greenhouse gas impacts are. This is a great tool to go over during our pre-application meeting. And I'm not saying it's easy, but it makes the process easier. So for a farmer, this is something that we could easily walk through with that spreadsheet and say, this is what we're asking for, whether we're talking swine or dairy or any of the other animal types that we have.
Okay,
That
thank you.
covered-
That was very yeah, that was very helpful information to help me understand the climate part of it. So yeah, that was very well explained. So thank you.
I will just say to board member Bakken that MPCA did share with us the calculator for potential inclusion into the packet, and it was a very complicated piece of information, so we chose not to include it. So I apologize for that decision, making you not have that piece of information, but I know it's available, and I'm sure if you wanted to see it, we can get it to you.
Okay, sure. No, that I don't necessarily need it. Just answering some of the questions of the what ifs and helping me to wrap my hands around the requirements of those things that need to be inputted into an EAW.
Thanks, board member Bakken. And you have any other questions or comments at this time? Or any EQB members have any questions or comments at this time? Oh, I see board member Nelson, go ahead.
I had a clarifying question. I was just a little confused. Megan said that PCA receives a draft EAW from a project proposal if you contact the county. But I was previously under the understanding that where the county has been delegated, they would be the RGU. So, or was I not understanding that correctly?
So contacting the county is a part of the, I'll back up. So the PCA is the RGU when those animal thresholds are exceeded. So 1,000 animal units or 500 animal units, it's in a sensitive location. As a part of PCA's review process, we notify counties that we are now in review of this proposal, this proposed EAW, and would accept comments from them at that time. The feedlot permitting program is a little different than environmental review. We're still talking feedlot, but when the state feedlot permitting program becomes involved, those numbers are a little different than what our thresholds are for environmental review. Up to the feedlot numbers, the county is the delegated authority to do the feedlot permitting program. Once they cross the feedlot program numbers, then the state is involved. And that relates to the NPDES or the SDS feedlot permit. It's a little confusing.
Oh, and there's maybe one other piece of information to add to that response. Go ahead.
Yeah, hi, thanks. So related to that, the question about, I think part of the question was whether or not delegated counties serve as the RGU for feedlot projects. Not normally. In some instances where there's a special consideration, a special protection area, or if there's a phased action, if you recall, we talked about phased action a little bit. Those are the only instances in which MPCA would not be the RGU. So it's not very common that the county actually serves as the RGU to complete the EAW. So what Megan is referring to is when the MPCA is serving in the function of RGU, making sure that the local entity, regardless of their status as being delegated for feedlot permitting activities, that's separate from environmental review. I'm sorry. Hi, my name is Anna Hotz. I am currently the Assistant Division Director for the Resource Management and Assistance and Remediation Divisions at MPCA. I formerly served as the manager of the Environmental Business Assistance section until last week, and that is where environmental review is housed.
Thank you, Anna. Board Member Nelson, does that answer your question?
I think so. If I could put it just a different way to clarify is there's some mention that the counties could also use this form, but it sounds like that would be very rare.
Correct. Thank you for that question. Any other board members, EQB board members who have questions or comments? Not seeing any additional hands up or hearing anything at this time, then we do want to offer the opportunity for the public to comment on the draft feedlot specific EAW form. And so there's a lot going on around feedlots right now, as we were talking about, but just to, again, to underscore what's already been said, our jurisdiction is on the use of the form. So we're looking for any comments that are focused on the topic of the EAW form specific to feedlot. So members of the public, if you have signed up in person or if you would like to speak, raise your hand in Teams if you'd like to comment, and we can call on you and alternate between any of those in the room who would like to speak on this topic. So with that, Rebecca, are you ready to call on folks?
Yes, Madam Chair, I am looking at our online attendees and we don't have any raised hands yet.
Yeah, as a reminder, members of the public, if you'd like to comment on this, again, specific to the topic of the EAW feedlot specific form, please raise your hand now.
Signed up in the room? There's one person that just raised their hand. Renee. Allowing your mic, so you should be able to unmute now.
Go ahead, Renee, and please keep your comments to 2 minutes.
Well, I have some questions regarding the with the alternate form. I'm with the White Earth Band of Minnesota Chippewa Tribe Pesticide Coordinator, and it was my understanding that the RGUs, the counties that are designated as RGU, they would still have to use this form, and it's kind of concerning that they might not have to. Can we get some clarification on that with the alternate EAW forms?
Thank you, Renee, for that question. Not seeing any hands up, so if Megan or others have any thoughts you want to share at this time.
I can try and answer that. Thank you for the question, Renee. This is Kayla with EQB. It's my understanding that the alternative form is an option that can be used for the county, but the standard form is also an option. Either way, if there is a feedlot that requires an EAW to be performed, it will be on either the standard or the alternative form.
Thank you, Kayla.
And Renee Keiser again has raised her hand.
Renee, you can go ahead again.
So is there gonna be updates made to the other EAW form? Including like some of the tribal comments and input that was included in the alternate form? Is that gonna be included on the standard form?
Thank you for that question, Renee. And Executive Director Nick Shore said she'd be happy to speak at this time on that.
Thank you. So at this time, I don't, what we really our understanding has been is that the role or the goal of this new form is to align it with the current version of the standard EAW form. And EQB doesn't have any major plans at this point to update that form, but certainly if there are things that are coming up in this process that we think would make improvements to the standard EAW form, that's always something that we can consider and would be happy to have some conversations about moving forward. There's nothing, planned, but we're always happy to have that input. And I see, I think there's a continuing conversation.
And that's her hand up again.
Okay, go ahead and Renee.
You can go ahead, Renee.
Okay.
If you have
And thank
additional-
you. Thank you. Yes. And following up with that, with Kayla's answer, when is the alternate form triggered for counties, and how do they choose the standard or the alternative on which one that they're gonna go by? Is there any set guidelines in place for when counties decide which form that they're gonna use?
Thank you, Renee, for that question too. And I'll just check with Kayla or Megan if they want to address that at this time.
Sure, I can speak first to that. So that's Kayla again. It's delegated to the county to make the decision as to what form they would want to use in that situation. But again, as we've talked about earlier, it is very infrequent that a county would be the RGU filling out a form, but the mandatory category in Rule 4410, 4300 is the one that specifies when a EAW is required for a feedlot. So we can reference that.
Thank you, Kayla. Great. Do you have any other public comments? Commenters?
No more commenters at this time, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Rebecca. Thank you, Renee, for your comments and questions. All right, so then why don't we move on in the agenda? So the next item, we have Jesse Sensky, who's our Environmental Review Program Administrator. He'll present the 2023 Performance Report, which is on page 58 of your packet. So welcome, Jesse.
Madam Chair, we may have lost the camera that would allow everybody to see Jesse if he sits over there.
Jesse, would you want to just come over here?
Yeah.
I think that one is. No, we lost.
No, we lost that.
Now we lost the other one. There we go. Okay. Thank you, Jesse, for holding with that.
Okay, Madam Chair, thank you. Good afternoon, ARIS members and other board members that may be present today. I hope you're as excited as I am today to talk a little data and information about environmental review. Now, specifically, I'm here today to talk about the environmental review program performance report. Now, typically, this is done on an annual basis, but given we had some staff turnover in 2023, we have now combined the performance report to include both 2022 and 2023. The data that I'll be discussing today represents what the EQB has been collecting regarding the environmental review program and is ultimately dictated by the data management plan. The data that is then presented in the report is almost entirely accessed from environmental review notice submittals through the EQB Monitor service. And so for today's purpose, my presentation kind of breaks into two parts. And so I'll start by kind of summarizing the data and the information from within the performance report. And I'll be highlighting certain pieces of that information and then also leading to discussion about any trends or conclusions that can be made from that data. And then I'm going to transition a bit, and I'd like to start a conversation with Harris and the other board members that are present today regarding potential improvements that we intend to identify within a data management plan revision. Now, I will focus that on some information that the EQB could start to collect to better understand the program. And then this discussion of this portion of the presentation will ultimately lead to a later presentation at the next ARIS meeting. And that will include, direct examples of improvements and actions that we plan to enact, as well as include a discussion likely of actions that may take more planning and won't necessarily be ready for implementation at that time. So with that, we can jump into the data. Next slide, please. Thank you. So here we have a chart representing the number of processes completed by year. And I'd like to point out and clarify kind of what I mean by completed and how we count a process within a year. So for an EAW, that would be represented by the publication of an EIS need decision, and EISs and AUARs are represented by the publication of adequacy decisions. And also note for these counts, AUAR updates are not reflected here, and supplemental EISs are also not included in these counts. So in 2022, we'll recap the last 2 years of. In 2022, we saw 78 EAWs, 0 EISs, 7 AUARs, 14 complete petitions. I already have a pile of sick kids at home, so I'm going to keep drinking my water to not lose my voice. 2023, we saw 53 EAWs, 2 EISs, 6 AUARs, and another 14 complete petitions. So comparatively, a bit of a drop in the number of EAWs from 22 to 23, and then also no EISs in 2022. However, if you compare kind of the averages over the last decade or so, they seem to fall within a bit of the normal range that we expect to see. Next slide, please. And I suppose I should point this out since I'm talking data. If you have any, and the slides are there on the screen, if you have any questions or want clarification, feel free to interrupt me at any time. I think that would serve likely any board member's questions better than we did. So on this slide, I just wanted to highlight, some of the common project types that we are seeing. And with this slide, specifically only representing EAWs. Now, if you do want to see a full breakdown of all the project types that we saw over the last 2 years within the report, the appendices A, B, and C, they do have that breakdown of all the mandatory categories. But from here, as you can see, there's a couple commonalities with, residential development and wetlands and public water types of projects. Being in the top number of common project types, and those two specifically are pretty characteristically seen in those common project types year to year. So nothing out of the ordinary there. I did include this time the discretionary EAW counts, as I did find that rather interesting, especially in 2023, given that 10 of the 53 EAWs that were completed were discretionary EAWs. And now I think there's likely a bit of correlation from the discretionary EAWs and the number of petitions we've seen in the last 2 years. But it's not a perfect correlation. There is still some differences there that don't fully line up. So I think it's something interesting to pay attention to, and likely something that I'd like to keep my eye on forward, just so that we can understand, pay more attention to those potential project types that are being ordered for a discretionary EAW, just to see if there's any discrepancies within mandatory categories. Pay attention to. And then also not on the slide, just note the 2 EASs in 2023. There was a nuclear waste project and also a wetlands and public waters project. Next slide, please. So piggybacking kind of on the type of projects that we have seen over the last 2 years, I did want to mention the type of projects that we are seeing get petitioned. Now, typically this isn't a normal amount of information that we include in the performance report, but I did find it interesting to kind of compare these petition projects to the mandatory types of review to see if there are any anomalies or misalignments with the actual mandatory categories. And ultimately, you know, over the last 2 years, we've seen a total of 28 complete petitions, 14 each year. And most commonly, we saw mining projects, ditch improvement projects, resorts, campgrounds, RV parks in shoreland and residential. Next slide, please. I think we skipped a slide. There we go. So continuing with petitions, I wanted to highlight the outcomes of petitions over the last 2 years. Now, the end result of a petition is meant to be an RGU making an EAW needs. So I summarized the results to be presented as projects that proceed to require an EAW as a result of a petition. The 4 projects that were petitioned in 2022 did proceed to require an EAW, and 6 in 2023 proceeded to require an EAW. Now, there is a little bit of an overlap here if you compare these projects to the common type of projects we see undergoing mandatory. And you can see that in the mining projects as well as the residential components. So a bit of an overlap. And so my last piece on petitions that I wanted to include was this chart here, which is illustrating the number of complete petitions and incomplete petitions that the EQB is seeing in a given year. So blue is representing complete and green is incomplete. So EQB staff have a role in petitions where they evaluate the petitions when they are submitted. And that evaluation is just ensuring that they are meeting the rule requirements, the minimum rule requirements as theirs. And then if it is deemed complete by the EQB staff, it is assigned to an RGU for further evaluation. As you can see by this chart, the number of incomplete submittals are trending a relatively high number, which is leading to increased submittals overall. Next slide. So next, I do want to get into sort of more of the metrics regarding the other environmental review processes. Really, most of this data will revolve around EAWs, because that is ultimately where the majority of our data comes from. Now, in regards to participation within environmental review, the EQB is interested to see the impact of public participation on environment. So RGUs identify the amount of comment letters received during a public comment period when they publish an EIS need decision. The data here shows pretty steady results over the last 3 years of around 10 letters received per public comment period per project. However, there are some pretty significant outliers that can change these numbers rather drastically. So 2022, for example, had one project that received over 7,000 letters. And so if I had included that number in the average calculation, it would have jumped that average from 7 comment letters per project to 97 letters per project. Similarly, in 2021, a project that had well over 1,000 comment letters would have raised that to from 14 to around 30 average comment letters per project. So I point that out just as a notice that this information requires a little bit of extra attention to it in order to properly represent the data and not make any incorrect assumptions. While it is still worth noting the significance of the larger commented on projects. Next slide, please. So again, in attempting to understand and to assess if environmental review is meeting its goals of providing opportunities for the public to interact with, better understand projects and their potential environmental effects. This question here on the slide is one that RGUs are asked within the EQB Monitor submittal service. So 73% in 2022, 77% in 2023 indicate that the environmental review process did create opportunities for the public to participate. That otherwise would not have happened. Next slide, please. I think we skipped one. Did we not? Nope, we're good. Sorry. So this slide here is representing, EQB has been tracking who is completing environmental review. And so we can continue to assess where RGU authorities are and most often implement. So these graphs here are representing RGUs for EAW projects specifically. In 2022, we saw 82% of EAWs were completed at the local level and 15% at the state agency level. 2023 compared to 74% local and 26% state level. And I'll note the 2 EISs that were done in 23 were both state agency RGU. Next slide, please. So this chart here is a chart which is representing the average time an environmental review process takes. Now, the time data that is collected by the EQB can be useful in assessing compliance with rule mandated timelines, as well as an opportunity to inform about potential time expected to spend within completing an environmental review process. A little bit of explanation on the time data here. The data that is collected by the EQB for EAWs and EISs is represented by the start time of that is represented by the time a submittal for an environmental review, so an EAW or a scoping EAW, when that submittal is deemed complete and ready for publication, and then completed until the time that an EIS need decision is made for an EAW or an EIS adequacy decision is made for an EIS. And now for AUARs, the data is a bit more expansive as there's some rule language that defines an RGU making an order for review. And in that, the RGUs are actually defining the area with which in the AUAR will encompass. So by doing that, it just has a little bit better ability to actually encapsulate the full time that the process takes. So with that, the last 2 years, we saw AUARs in 2022 on average take 160 days, 210 days in 2023. Now in 2023, we did see more large AUARs published, and they have a bit more process steps compared to a regular AUAR. And so I think that additional time there is reflected based on those extra large AUARs being published. The 2 EISs in 2023 came to average out to about 770 days, and the EAWs in 2020 were 83 days and 97 days in 2023. Next slide, please. So now the information on this slide is really intended to assess the program's ability to accomplish the goals within rule and statute regarding identifying information that can be utilized by the public decision makers. So similarly to the public participation questions that I mentioned earlier, those are asked when an EISD decision is published. So now the monitor submittal service for these asks the RGUs if the EAW process was useful in identifying potential environmental effects and if the environmental review process identified mitigation measures for potential environmental effects. So RGUs indicated in 2022 and 2023 that 86% and 89% of the time, effectively, that the EAW process was indeed useful in identifying potential environmental effects. And 74% of the time in 2022, EAWs identified mitigation measures, while 83% of the time, mitigation measures were identified by EAWs in 2020. Next slide, please. So, now that I kind of threw a bunch of numbers at everybody and had a chance to highlight certain things and information that I found interesting, I wanted to try to talk some conclusions. And I think, there are certainly a lot more that we could make than I have up on this slide. And so I'd be happy to hear from any board members or ARIS members if they'd like to jump in and discuss things that they've noticed. But the ones that are on the slide are the one that I thought were interesting and required at least some mentioning. So the number of projects that were undergoing environmental review for 2022 and 2023 are mostly within yearly norms. We are seeing a high percentage of incomplete petition submittals. Projects that are being petitioned do include ditch improvement projects, which those in themselves do not particularly have a mandatory category alignment. And RGUs are indicating the EAW process is resulting in lower than expected public participation opportunities, as any environmental review project has a mandatory public comment period. And also RGUs are indicating the environmental review process is successfully identifying usable information regarding potential environmental effects, and is also quite often identifying mitigation for any potential environmental effects. So if anybody did want to offer their own conclusions that they've made from the data, I'd love to hear that. If not, I will happily continue. Here we go. So now that I've sort of had a chance to throw all, oh, boy, I guess. This is where I reached the transition of my presentation. So I'm getting away from the data of 2022 and 2023 a little bit. I want to start talking about potential improvements that we could, as the EQB, could start to think about to make. And so before I really get to that, talking about those potential improvements on how we do collect and analyze data, I just wanted to put up a reminder of EQB's responsibilities in the environment program. So EQB ultimately is tasked with assisting program participants in understanding and implementation of rules. We are meant to monitor the effectiveness of the program and make any changes or modifications to the rules as needed to improve the effectiveness of the program at meeting its objectives. Now, objectives of environmental review are defined in rule, specifically 4410-0300. And so some of the information that I did present today, including usable information and public participation, were included because they are called out specifically within those objectives. Another rule of note that is on the slide that I do want to point out is specifically 4410-2900. And this rule is a directive for EQB to monitor the effectiveness of environmental review through the review of records of decisions that are maintained by an RGU throughout the permitting process for projects that have completed the EIS. Now, this is intended to inform the EQB about how the information obtained within environmental review is then ultimately used and informing later decisions regarding the project. It is then meant to provide the EQB with a better understanding of how environmental review is really truly being used. Now, given the data you've seen today, EISs are not happening at a relatively high number, which ultimately is providing the EQB with a very limited opportunity to have access to that level of information. Next slide, please. And so with that, I would like to begin discussing, kind of how EQB is currently using data to analyze and better understand the environmental review program, and then where we can actually begin to improve on that. So I have created a few categories here in sort of an effort to bucket certain ideas together. And then I want to discuss how the data that we collect kind of fits into these categories and expand upon ways that we can improve that area. So first we have the descriptive category, and that's kind of this how much and what's happening. And EQB really has a very strong understanding of what happens in environmental review. I think if you look back at what the data that's come out of the program performance report, you would see that reflected quite well. So we know the project types and the ER type of different environmental review processes and the RGUs that are completing these processes. And really, this is the data that to me is kind of, for the most part, easiest to collect. Is really, these are the sort of things that are really necessary to provide about a project when they're being made available for publication in the EQB model. So this category is pretty well set up and doesn't need much more improvements in terms of what and how we collect it. Now, with the launch of the environmental review database, we have already improved a little bit our ability to make this sort of information available to others. It is just limited to to, project by project. So I think there's still a bit of space there to increase the transparency and the availability of that data. And I think that is something that we've already sort of started on, and sort of a public facing dashboard that kind of just includes the information that is within this performance report, but in a more transparent and publicly available way. The next category is the results category, and really this category is sort of meant to identify information that was can be tied to our CI work that we did in the matrix that was developed over this last summer. And it's really about understanding whether environmental review is creating usable information. Is it resulting in public engagement? And then how the process of completing environmental review is really going for RGUs. And lastly, what the environmental review is resulting. So the idea of usable information is kind of tied to mostly what an RGU public member or a person of the public would value as usable information in regards to better understanding a project and its potential environmental effects. So from the data that we have, we know that RGUs are indicating that the environmental review or the EAW process is highly successful at identifying usable information. And that in itself is great. But what we don't have is a great sense of how that information is being used once environmental review is complete. We have started the process of identifying what is needed to know within this category, but we really need to expand and improve on the information we gather in order to understand if the program is truly meeting its objectives. And I think some of these that would include there would include, the time spent in environmental review and the public participation in environmental review. And for those two, we've already identified those. We've started to collect information on those. But I think, specifically for those two, there's a need for, small adjustments to the questions that we're just asking to hopefully get better information. So for example, in the conclusions that I made from the data, we're currently asking if the environmental review process created public participation opportunities. We're only seeing 70 to 75% indicate this is true. And the way that question is asked is pretty odd to me, as every environmental review project has required public participation, public comment period. So just by the way that question is asked, I think by answering it, it should be 100% indicate that all environmental review projects do indeed create an additional public participation opportunity that otherwise would not have happened. So I think, maybe it's just the question that we're asking. We can tweak that in a different way and potentially ask that in a new way that could lead to information that's more revealing of the impact of public participation. Next slide. So the next category is this diagnostic category. So kind of like the whys and those questions of why did things happen. And this is a space where EQB really has pretty limited ability to come to conclusion regarding these whys. As EQB is not directly involved in the performing environmental review, it makes it pretty difficult to fully have access to data to help answer those why. But if we begin to obtain some of that information, I think it might help us better understand if there are things that we as the EQB can do or need to do to make changes to the program. But for one example that we do have, where the EQB does have a role in, is the petition. Now we can deduce from the data that we collect that too many incomplete petitions are happening. And that process can certainly benefit from some improvements, either through improved guidance or the inclusion of petitions into the environmental review database. And because of the EQB's access to this information, we can make such recommendations relatively easily. Now, the last category that I want to talk about is sort of the biggest unknown based on the data that we collect. And that really is how impactful is the environmental review program. Now, this category does have some interactions with these other categories that I discussed here, but and especially the results category, which kind of defines and talks about coming to better understanding of what is happening in environmental review. So I've identified, and we know that environmental review is pretty great at identifying, potential environmental effects and providing that usable information that environmental review is really meant to achieve. Now, the EQB, however, does not have any understanding of how that information is then being utilized. For example, the implementation of mitigation measures that may be identified within it. So we have this great understanding of recognizing that environmental review can effectively provide information. We as the EQB do not have any assurance or understanding of how it is being used once environmental review is complete. And we lack that knowledge or understanding of the interaction between environmental review and later decision-making processes. Next slide. So lastly, I kind of just wanted to summarize some of the improvements that I talked about that the EQB could make, regarding the information we collect within the program, and then, that we intend to pursue within the data management division. So we would like to see increased information regarding the time spent in environmental review, begin to get a better understanding of public participation and engagement impact. Beyond that, we'd like to begin to collect information that can lead to the EQB having a better understanding of potential environmental effects for projects. By having that understanding, that could lead to better analysis and EQB's ability to recognize potential improvements within EQB's own publications, such as the mandatory category report, or lead to beneficial guidance or improved understanding of the implementation of the program to better assist when providing technical assistance. Now, all of these really should work together to provide the EQB with better ability to assess how the program is being utilized by RGUs, how it is interacting with the decision-making processes regarding projects that go through environmental review and into the permitting. And with that, that's kind of where I end, and I'd happily take any questions or listen to any ideas that folks have about the data or improvements. And then just a reminder that I will be coming back, or we will be coming back with another presentation to the next ARIS meeting regarding potential improvements that we do hope to enact following that meeting, and then likely a discussion on improvements that may take more planning and the longer implementation phase.
Thank you, Jesse, for going through all that with the performance report. And so at this time, I'll see what questions or comments are out there from our ARIS members. You raise your hand or just jump in. Go ahead, Board Member Nelson.
Thank you, Jesse. I'm not sure how to ask my question, and maybe it's not a question as more as something to think about as we go forward into the future. But in terms of getting at how information is used by RGUs or in permitting, it seems to me that that the rubber hits the road on the EISs there. That in my experience with EAWs is it's almost that permits inform the EAW more than the other way around, because many of them are written to say, what permits are you getting? And then the question is whether that permit requirements prevent an impact. And then there's sort of the decision on whether that's correct or not. And so unless we get more ISs, I see getting down that road being more difficult. And then I don't know, just a little bit of disclosure to everybody. Jesse and I work together at Scott County, and we were sued over a permitting decision based on an EIS at the county level. We ended up winning in court, but those types of things, how would you even track those types of outcomes? Because you're not involved in that. So I don't know if there's questions embedded in there as much as sort of spitballing. So thank you. But very well done information. I appreciated reading it.
Thank you, Board Member Nelson. No, see your, I have, respond to that.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's, thank you, Chair. I think there's a lot of different ways that we could think about how we collect that information. You know, you're right, the rules really dictate that we gain that information through the EIS process. And it's not really written to collect that from an EAW. And I think that given the, you know, the number of EISs that happen now, the program has evolved to change away from that. How can we kind of adapt that sort of theory into, you know, the EAW process as well? And you're right, there are quite a few ways that could happen, and I don't think that we've fully nailed that down. I think there's within the revision of the data management plan, I think we'll probably, you know, analyze a couple different routes. Start with kind of the simple way of sending surveys to RGUs with questions and hoping for responses, and then likely build or potentially build that out to, you know, ask different questions within the EQB submittal service, EQB monitor submittal service. And then I think beyond that, you know, rule changes and things of that nature, which gets a lot further down the road, seeing if that's required.
Board Member Nelson, any other thoughts on that you want to share at this time?
Madam Chair, no, thank you.
Thank you for your comment or question. Okay, go ahead, Board Member Bauerkemper.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Thank you, Jesse, for pulling together the data and presenting it today. First, just a comment, I guess. I'm with you as far as that question about opportunities for engagement. You know, as I looked at it, kind of tripped over it a little bit. It seems the way, you know, some folks are probably answering that question, and some folks are probably encountering that question and answering a little bit of a different question about whether or not the opportunities were effective. And so that seems like a real challenge to draw anything meaningful from that. And so hopefully we can ask some clearer questions or come up with some info on that. So I appreciate you observing the wrinkle there. I do have a question for you, kind of a very narrow question about the incomplete petitions and how you're counting them. So I see here that, you know, some of the petitions come in, they're incomplete, they go back with commentary, and then they come back in maybe as complete, maybe they come back in as incomplete. How do the numbers work when we see a number of incomplete petitions? Or maybe this way, like if somebody submits an incomplete petition, they receive some feedback and they resubmitted it, it's complete. Does it count in both of those categories, or do you only count it as a complete petition, or what kind of what's going on there in general?
Chair, thank you, Member Bauerkemper. Yeah, really every submittal is then counted in its own and tallied. Now, there are a couple instances in the last couple of years where an incomplete submittal never came back, so it didn't manage to go to that complete step. But the way that you just described it there is, yes, I'm counting basically every submittal and then tallying those as a total.
Okay, thank you. That's helpful, and I agree in any case that that if we can provide some guidance regarding the petitions, it presumably would make them easier to process within the EQBs, you know, among the EQB staff, and it would make everything flow a little better. Now I know that it will take work to create that guidance in order to hopefully create less work when processing the petitions, but I support such an effort. Thanks.
Thank you, Board Member Bauerkemper. Any other ARIS members with questions or comments? I'm not seeing any, but I will open it up to other EQB board members for comments or questions. Not seeing any at this time. Well, thank you, Jesse. It sounds like you will be coming back and give us another update. So appreciate your update today. Thank you. So then that brings us to the next item on the agenda. We have the greenhouse gas emission calculator update, and Kayla Walsh, our environmental review program administrator, and Stephanie Aho, greenhouse gas data analysis QB, will present the update on the greenhouse gas emission calculator. Welcome, Stephanie. And I'll come back, Kayla.
Okay, well, thank you, Chair and members. So as I mentioned earlier, in December of 2022, AQB approved adding question 18 to the standard EAW form. And question 18 specifically says, for all proposed projects, provide quantification and discussion of project greenhouse gas emissions. Describe any mitigation considered to reduce the project's greenhouse gas emissions. And then we also added question number 7, which asks for resiliency and adaptation considerations. So it says to describe the climate trends and the general location of the project, and it asks for how climate change is anticipated to affect that location during the life of the project. So again, that's question 18 and question 7 on the standard EAW form. So we worked across multiple agencies to then create a guidance for how do you answer these very big, heavy hitting questions. And that guidance was specifically tailored for the greenhouse gas emissions, the carbon footprint. So it includes steps to assemble a carbon footprint, to assess mitigation, and to identify adaptation measures if that's possible for your project. It offers a lot of existing tools, a lot of existing calculators, and things to consider in that guidance. I pulled a quote from the guidance because I think it really illustrates the purpose of the tool that we want to build. It says, it is important that environmental documents required by the Minnesota Environmental Policy Act, or MEPA, include usable information about the potential effects of a proposed project on greenhouse gas emissions and climate change. Estimation of emissions is a useful way to measure the potential climate impacts of a proposed project. It helps track progress in meeting state and local greenhouse gas reduction goals and supports efforts to reduce emissions, mitigate, and adapt to the impacts of climate change. So I feel like that's a good summary of why we're doing this. But that guidance document itself is 50 pages long, so we jam-pack a lot of resources into it. And we want to make answering these questions easier and a little bit more straightforward than that, as easy as possible. So we want to provide a singular calculator that combines all of that existing data and resources behind those calculators into one place to help answer these questions. Again, so the point of doing the calculator is to make the climate assessments consistent whenever possible, really more effective and efficient using geographic specific data, Minnesota specific or regionally specific when possible. We want it to be really accurate, have the most up-to-date and accurate information in one tool. So we received legislative funding to do that. So to help accomplish this calculator, we've contracted with the contractor ICF International, and they will help us to design the emissions calculator and scope it for as many different project types as possible, including both the emissions a project might emit and also the emissions avoided if we're looking into renewable energy. So it will also list that mitigation and resiliency options per sector if they are available to help answer question 7. So we really recognize that the types of projects that need environmental review are highly variable, ranging from housing developments to mining to feedlots, like we were talking about earlier. So we will be relying on many different technical experts in those fields throughout the design and the scoping of the tool to make sure that we have accurate and useful information based on what information a project proposer is able to input and provide into the tool. And so Stephanie will be managing the build out and the scoping of that process. We're really excited to have her on board. I'm happy to hand it over to Stephanie.
Thank you, Kayla. Next slide, Kayla.
So for this project, there's going to be sort of three main groups that are helping create it. The EQB is going to be setting sort of those expected outcomes, which is something we've already done, as Kayla alluded to. We're going to be facilitating the creation of the tool, and we will also have, approval on those final deliverables that come in. We have contracted with ICF, as Kayla said, and ICF will be responsible for the actual creation of the tool. They will be responsible for convening experts and sort of interacting back and forth with us and those experts to really create a tool that's going to answer this question effectively. They are also going to be designing a user guide that not only tells people how to use the tool, but also make sure that the tool is adaptable into the future as data sources change. And perhaps we want to update the UI, user interface, as our needs change. So the third group is going to be a technical advisory team. And this team will be put together to provide data insight, letting us know, what recent data is out there, what holes might exist in the data. They're also going to advise sort of the methodology of the model creation, and just sort of be a really iterative process back and forth between ICF and the advisory team to make sure that ICF is creating a tool that everybody can use and enjoy. Next slide. Oh, I wanted to say one other thing about that technical advisory team. We are leaning heavily on the technical for this. And so we acknowledge that there's a lot of users, potential users that might want to help with the process of developing this tool. We're keeping the team sort of narrow in the beginning to that technical data focus. But there will be opportunities along the way as this tool is created for that feedback from potential users. So just because you might not be on the technical advisory team, you will still have the opportunity to provide input before the final tool is put out there. Okay. So here's the project timeline. We have actually kicked off with ICF already. We had our first meeting last Thursday. We had a good sort of high-level view discussion about what the scope and methodology is. We plan to continue talking with them. I think we're going to start off on a bi-weekly basis and just have that back and forth with them to make sure that we are both understanding what is going to be delivered and what is needed to answer this question on the EAW. We plan to kick off the technical advisory committee in mid-April. And they can help also with the scope and methodology, but they really are the start of defining and assessing those data sources that we are going to be using for this model. And those sources are not just data that exists, but also other models that also exist, because we don't really want to reinvent the wheel here. If something exists and it's working really well, we want to incorporate that and make a really far-reaching tool, because like Kayla said, there's a lot of different projects, a lot of variable projects, and this tool is hoping to answer the emissions question for many, if not all of them. So that process, like I said, is going to start in April. The scope and methodology should be done September 2024-ish. Data sources should be really established November timeframe. The model development and compiling that data is going to start right at the beginning. And that process between ICF's creation of the model and the feedback coming in from the technical advisory team and EQB is going to be very iterative. There's going to be a lot of back and forth, a lot of small deliverables along the way for us to look at and make sure that we're all on the same page to create a really useful product. The final report and documentation is the last bubble there. They plan to start that in 2025, right at the beginning of 2025. And so about that time, we will expect to have sort of I hesitate to say complete model, but it will be, sort of reaching its final form. And sort of that fall timeframe into winter is going to be when we want a lot of user feedback, sort of user test the model. And, we're going to need a lot of help there. So that's where that opportunity is that I alluded to before. Yeah, and so they will provide the final model and they will document and provide a final report that includes, not only how to run the model, but like I said, a way to adapt the model into the future. Because we don't want this to be a tool that lasts 5 years and then we have to do it all over again. We want it to be something that's useful for many people for many years to come. And with that, I am done. Thank you.
Thank you, Gail and Stephanie. Great. And just see if there are any questions, comments from ARIS members. Maybe while they're thinking about a question, if you could go back to the timeline and, or you know what? Yeah, don't remember that. I think I remember enough, but the last bubble, the final bubble, you talked about the document. I think it was, but that's also, when you talk about the model, that's the technology that would be used. Is that, I'm actually wondering if that's the case. Is this something where the calculator that is online, accessible to all on the website?
Yes,
That's-
so,
okay.
so the goal is to have it online at that June 2025 mark.
Oh, okay.
So,
Good.
it will be available for select testing probably around that January time, but not available to the public quite yet.
Okay.
We want to make sure that it's tested and stress tested before we put it out there.
That's right. Good. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
for that. Other ARIS members, questions, comments? Not seeing any or not seeing any hands up. All right. Well, thank you for that update. Very exciting work going on. So we'll look forward to more updates in the future on this. Thank you for that. Thanks for the technical advisory team members who worked on it too. So then let's see, then the next item on the agenda, we have the mandatory categories report. Again, we have Kayla Walsh here to walk us through the progress of the mandatory categories report. So Kayla, go ahead and take it away again.
Okay, thank you, Chair, and thank you, members. So Environmental Quality Board, we publish a mandatory category report every 3 years. And so this report, it's meant to specify the purpose behind each category that we have and analyze any recommendations that we might want to make for changes to the categories. So between mandatory EAW and mandatory EIS categories combined, there's over 60 different categories. And each one of them has a different applicable threshold for determining when review is required for a potential project. They all also assign a responsible governmental unit to do the review per category. And so this is the legislative charge. Boiled down a little bit, but statute 116D is pretty clear. It says that the minimum requirements of the report are that for each category, we will list its purpose or why it is a category in the first place. What is its history? What are its statements of need and reasonableness? We can list any potential state, local, or federal permits that might apply for a project that would trigger the category. We would recommend if a category should be modified, eliminated, or unchanged. So EQB published an overview of mandatory categories back in 2004, and that was not an official mandatory category report. It was more of an overview, taking stock. They did that again in 2013, and then the legislation was formalized with these report requirements. So after the legislation, we have the mandatory category report as we know it today, published in 2018, 2021, and the next one we're working on now is due in December 2024. And so we're spending some time right now really gathering feedback, reviewing recommendations that have been made in the past and might not have been acted on. And pretty soon we will start drafting an outline and then drafting and redrafting the report itself. And that'll be a really iterative process with a lot of feedback opportunities as we move forward. And then again, we will publish it in seek board approval for the report in November so that it can be published December 1st. So as far as that first step, the review and engage portion, so far we have reviewed, again, those statements of need and reasonableness in the past rules for the mandatory categories, and we've reviewed the past reports that I mentioned. I've summarized some of those recommended changes to the mandatory categories that have come out through the continuous improvement process that we did last summer. And then if you'll remember when we were doing the CI process, there were a lot of recommendations that were specific to mandatory categories, and we rolled them into this process to consider them here. And then on top of that research, we also launched a survey and an online engagement webpage asking for feedback. We did that in February, and so that recently closed, and we're going through the results of that. But the engagement HQ question that was really meant for a broad audience, it asked, what projects do you think should receive environmental review that might not be getting reviewed already? And we also launched a survey, and the survey was much more detailed. You could provide detailed feedback per category, so folks would need to provide some specific language changes to a category there. So we received over 100 individual respondents. Many of those folks also had multiple points of feedback per response. So it's a lot of information to sift through, but we're looking for some themes in those responses right now. And then we're also planning for hosting a roundtable in April, probably end of April, to dive into some certain comments a little further. And again, just have an opportunity for listening and for some more feedback. So, yeah, I think that is pretty much the summary of our engagement for the report so far. We're also working with all of our tech reps for EQB, and a lot of them have provided us with very detailed feedback on the categories that they are working on or assigned to as RGUs in the rule. And so we're finding a lot of common threads between what we received in that survey with what we're hearing from tech reps and others that are working at state agencies. So we're also meeting with our co-authoring agencies regularly. Those are co-authors that are named in the legislation. That's the PPA, DNR, and DOT. They are named to help engage and write the report. So we have regular meetings with those staff to discuss some feedback and their feedback as practitioners. Again, comparing that to the public feedback and finding some common threads. Pretty soon I'll start drafting the report, and we'll be consulting closely again with those authors along the way, very iterative process. So the types of changes for mandatory categories that we're hearing right now, they seem to fit into different levels or different buckets of change. First, I think we need to ask ourselves, what is the problem with the category that they're trying to solve with this comment? And then could that problem be solved by updating guidance, by clarifying some definitions maybe in the rule, or doing some other housekeeping level changes that would make sure that EQB rules are aligning with other rules and statutes as other rules and statutes may have changed. And then lastly, we can figure out if maybe a change would call for a larger rulemaking effort. Maybe it would be changing the threshold to higher the threshold, lower it, or add a new category. And so that would just be identified as something that would take a lot, many more conversations, many more discussions to decide if we were going to do rulemaking or not. There we go. Next slide. Thank you. So I added this slide just to demonstrate exactly what's included per category. We're getting a lot of suggestions for new categories, so there will probably be a part of the report to discuss those opportunities to add potentially new categories. And then for each existing category, it should cover these topics. So first, we would provide that brief history, the reasoning behind the threshold, the number of reviews completed per category over the last 3 years since the last report. And then what are people saying about this category? We can provide a summary of the feedback, what folks might like or dislike, and then any concerns or considerations for changes. And again, those considerations will be bucketed into whether we could, address them via guidance changes or short and simple rulemaking or a larger rulemaking effort. And then we intend to work really closely with our tech reps and our co-authors. And we, again, want to provide a lot of touch points for you all as board members to take a look at the report as it's being drafted. So we're committing to having a draft ready for likely bringing back to the board in May to share, and then we'll be drafting in earnest in the summer. By the fall, we'll have a draft report ready and available for informal public input that will be shared with the board first before we do that informal public input. That's not a requirement, but it's something that we want to do, especially since we've had so much engagement from the public already. And then in November, the board would need to vote to approve the report if we want to make that timeline to send it to the legislature by December 1st. And so that's the wide overview, the high level 101 on mandatory categories report process. And I'm excited to share some more progress in that outline in the upcoming board meeting, but I'm happy to take any questions now about process.
Thank you, Kayla, for going through the process. So yeah, more work to do to get to the December 1st legislative deadline of submitting the report. But with that, yes, ARIS board members, do you have any questions or comments for Kayla? Hearing any, I'll open it to any QB board members. Oh, go ahead. Woman.
All right, let's see if I can click all the right buttons. The roundtable in April is intriguing, and I'm really thrilled that you're kind of pulling people together, to discuss. Is that open to board members or others, or is that really a technical only committee? I'm just interested in being on the wall and just listening to the conversation.
Go ahead, Kayla.
Yeah, thank you for the question. It is definitely open to the public, so any board members are invited to attend and listen in. So as soon as we have the invite ready to go, we'll make sure to send it out to everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks for that question. Others? Other ARIS member questions or comments? Or EQB board member comments or questions? Not hearing any. I'm sure we will have more questions and comments and discussion as we go along here through the course of the year. So thank you for that update, a lot of process. All right, so that brings us to the public comment period. Item on the agenda. So we'll take comments on other items. So this is outside of the feedlot forum comment period that we had earlier. More general comment time for the public. So if you would like to comment, please raise your hand. Let me know if you see any and have anyone signed up for commenting. Okay, thank you. All right, we'll give it a moment and see if anyone raises their hand.
No hands raised so far.
No hands raised. Okay, we'll just give it another moment just in case anyone's having technical issues. Anything. All right, I think we don't have anyone commenting during this part of the meeting today, so I think we can move on. And yeah, that brings us to the last item on the agenda, closing and adjournments. So with that, I want to just thank all the ARIS members and EQB board members who joined us today for the discussion, and thanks for your input, your questions. We have reached the end of the agenda. And so at this point, I will just ask if there is a motion to adjourn.
So moved, Holman?
Thank you, Board Member Holman. Is there a second?
Second, Nelson.
Thank you, Board Member Nelson. All right, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Nay? All right, hearing no opposition, the motion carries, and then the meeting is adjourned. Thanks again to everyone. And thank you again, Board Member Foster, if you're still on, for joining us for this last meeting. Best wishes to you. Good afternoon, everyone.